In the very near future, consumers will actually make the purchase on Google, on ChatGPT, on Perplexity, right? And that means fewer and fewer people will go to merchants' websites. And hence they will struggle now with reach and frequency even further. And so the question for them is now for the merchants, what do they do, right? And that's where, for example, our latest product innovation, what we call storefront ads, comes into play.
What's it like to leverage the data of millions of consumers to build a really unique and brand new advertising platform? Our guest today has the answer. Dr. Mark Grether has a truly unique perspective on the world of commerce media. He is leading PayPal's advertising business and building this really powerful advertising platform from the ground up. And it's powered by kind of this vast amount of transaction data that PayPal has. With access to data from over 400 million consumers, 30 million merchants kind of across the globe, PayPal has what they call a transaction graph. And it's really kind of a unique and differentiated asset in the world of commerce media. So in this conversation, we're going to dive into how PayPal is leveraging this unique position to work with some of the world's biggest brands. We're going to talk about the challenges facing today's different retail media networks. And then we're going to jump into the future of commerce in this AI-driven world that we're all kind of entering. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Well, welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, James.
So I'm excited to chat. I feel like everybody's really excited and interested in kind of what you're working on at PayPal. And so, I know you've probably done this 1,000 times, but, what's the vision and what are you building over there?
Sure. Happy to kind of talk a little more about PayPal Ads. And let me start why I joined PayPal Ads about a year ago, right? So I joined PayPal Ads and PayPal a year ago to basically build an advertising business from the ground up, powered by the transaction data that we have here at PayPal. If you think about it, we have data from 400 million consumers globally, spanning about 30 million merchants also globally, right? So that's a tremendous amount of transaction data that we have at our fingertips. And it's my pleasure now to use the transaction data, or as we call it, a transaction graph, right, to power our kind of advertising business. If you think about transaction graph, if you think about 30 million merchants, 400 million consumers globally, that is really unique. That's really truly differentiated. No one has access to the same amount of transaction data that we have. And Facebook has the social graph, TikTok has the interest graph, and we have our transaction graph. So it's a really, really powerful asset to start to build a business on top of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think when we first talked about this, I think the possibilities here, there's not really another company that can do what you guys are doing, right? Because even when you think about the credit card companies, it's a much different level kind of transaction, right? Like I might use a credit card at a store. They don't necessarily know what I'm purchasing. They don't know who I am. They don't know other websites I go to, kind of all the things that PayPal has access to, right?
Exactly. And even if you think about the largest retailers in our industry, right? Even they do not have as much data as we have. And even if they have a lot of data, right? They only have it on their own retail properties, right? They only know what's happening on their sites, right? And so they can maybe go deep, but they can't go horizontally, right? And many of our advertisers, many of our brands, they actually sell their products across many retailers. And so they would like to know what happens actually across all these retailers, right? Who is buying where, when are they buying, what are they buying, at what price points? And so from our perspective, the cool thing about PayPal is that we have this horizontal view that we're sitting across all of these kind of merchants. And so we have a much more kind of holistic picture on how consumers purchase a product or brand across all these kind of different touch points. And so I think it's a really, really cool differentiator that we are not just one single retailer, but we're sitting across all of them.
Yeah, I think it's it's a very unique position. And I think this question gets asked a lot now. I think when you think about it, is this retail media? Is this commerce media? Is this a financial media network? I guess it doesn't matter at the end of the day, but I'm curious your thoughts on how we're naming all these things.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is I'm wondering why are we calling actually a retail advertising business a network? Because it's typically not a network, right? It's a single retail site that is kind of monetized.
It's a publisher. Like we call them publishers, and people are like, "Oh, we're not a publisher," but it's but in the Adtech days, that's what we call it, right?
In the Adtech days, they're a publisher, right? And they're just one unique publisher, right? They're not really a network, right? If one is a network, meaning being basically the consolidator sitting across on of many publishers or many merchants in a specific case, right, then it's basically us, right? Because we are sitting really truly across many, many merchants. Now, whether you call it retail or commerce, I would go and would rather use the word commerce in our case, because it's not just the retailers, right, where consumers can make purchases with PayPal or Venmo. We have many, many more kind of verticals that are using PayPal to offer PayPal services to consumers, right? And so I would think the term commerce media network in our case, right, might be the best one, but at the end it's semantics, I guess.
Yeah, but it's an interesting observation, right? That this is actually a network.
Yeah, exactly.
And not just a single retailer.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a big difference. And again, that's also the power of what we have. If you think about the retailers, the publishers, right? Many of them are right now in the situation where they've built their businesses for maybe the last 2-3 years, right? And they're reaching to a point where they are basically sold out on their own properties. It's hard for them to go offsite because they do not have any data offsite. But at the same time, even though they might be sold out on site, the reach and frequency that they have is still challenging, right? And for most advertisers, it's not attractive to run a campaign across 200 retail media publishers one by one, right? And so coming to PayPal, where we are truly a network, they can actually run our campaigns across many, many retailers with one single campaign. And most importantly, also with measurement, insights, and distribution across all of these merchants, right? We can go back to a brand and say, hey, listen, on this merchant side, you're performing this way. On this other merchant side, you're performing this way, right? And so we can then make recommendations how to best allocate advertising dollars across many, many merchants that are part of our network. And then again, with the transaction data, we can provide incrementality, we can provide kind of closed loop attribution back to the brands.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's one of the things when we think about offsite with retailers, a lot of times they can sell offsite to a brand and they can tell you when that customer then converted on that retailer, but they can't tell you if they converted somewhere else.
Correct.
Right. Like, did we run this ad and say, oh, we're running this ad for Walmart, but they actually bought it at Kroger.
Yeah.
They don't know, but PayPal would actually know in that case.
Exactly. We would know because we have the payment data across so many merchants. And for most retailers, if we do run offsite, it's more kind of retargeting. That's what it is, right? Many of them want to bring people back to their own website so the transaction happens on their website.
Yeah. We took retargeting and we just renamed it to offsite retail media, and now it's a new thing. Yeah.
Now it's cool again, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of the people that we work with are kind of like you said, like they're running the retail media network. They've kind of done the easy part, right? Like I think we always talk about you can launch something, you can get some amount of money pretty easily, right? But then there's the next step, right? And obviously at Uber, like you did this whole run, right? Like you got it past that kind of the plateau that I feel like a lot of retail media networks hit. And so I'm curious how you what are the things when you look back and say like what are the things people that are running the retail media network that are probably hitting that plateau, thinking about, okay, now how do we really grow to a, very successful retail media network? What are the things that you'd tell to that GM sitting there?
It's a really, really tough question, right? And that's why I'm always recommending before you even get started, ask a few questions ahead of time, which is the first one is, what kind of data about audiences do you really have? And is the data actually truly differentiated, right? You're really unique, or can brands get access to the audience data somewhere else already, right? Because many retail companies do not have that differentiated kind of audience data. The second question for me to ask is, what is your reach and frequency? How often actually are consumers actually going to your retail website? In many cases, it may be 1, 2, 3 times a quarter. Well, that's not enough to really build a big advertising business on top of that. But it's the reality that in many cases, that's the frequency that they encounter, right? That's the second question. Then the third question is also an important one. Do you have actually access to advertisers? Or do you need to build a sales force? And if you do have access to advertisers, is it what we call the endemic advertisers, or do you have access to non-endemics? Because only non-endemic advertisers bring actually true kind of incremental advertising dollars to your platform. The fourth question is where you come in, James. What about the technology, right? How easily is it for them to implement a technology like Kevel? And the fifth question for me is, what's the cultural appetite to really build an advertising business? And
Right.
I'm pretty sure if people would go through this process and ask themselves all of these 5 questions, right, some of them maybe would not be that kind of bullish about building yet another retail business because we don't need 300 or 400. Yeah.
Right.
But many of them didn't, right? And as a consequence of that, after, let's say, the honeymoon of the first 12, 18 months, to your point, they struggle to then scale the business further. It's different to build a business on your on-site data, your on-site purchase intent, where you have high margins, versus going into off-site as an example, right? It's a whole different ballgame where off-site you have challenges about the margins, which are much lower, right? You have data fidelity, which is very different. You don't have purchase intent anymore. So offsite is a completely different ballgame in getting after kind of that spend. So typically for me, to answer your specific question is, most of them, they start on site with endemic advertisers. The second step for me would be, can you on site leverage non-endemic advertisers to give you incremental advertising dollars? Yeah, and then the next question might be, let's consider off-site. But again, for many retailers, I would have a big question mark whether that business is worth the effort and the hard work it's needed to do so. And then, the consequence of that is, okay, where do I grow next? And I do think we will see consolidation in our industry happening sooner than later, where a few big players will consolidate smaller players into a single buy, because it's the most efficient way to monetize from a publisher perspective. And it's also the way how advertisers actually would like to engage with the, let's say, mid to long tail of retailers.
Yeah, I mean, we always I won't name names, but we always, there's, small grocery retailer that it's kind of like, are they really going to be able to get their share of the dollars, and are the big CPGs going to want to buy directly from them versus going to somebody that says, hey, we've rolled up the bottom 20, grocery chains. Yeah.
And we have seen it in our industry a couple of times, right? We saw that in display where the actual ad network started, it became consolidated, right? We remember how many DSPs were out there, how many SSPs were out there at some point, how many mobile DSPs were out there, right? And so on and so forth. It's basically just a natural evolution of our industry, that in the beginning, many companies get started, and then over time, the industry is maturing, and as part of that, consolidation is happening, right? And again, from a PayPal perspective, as we already have the relationships to 30 million merchants, as we already have technology integrations to these merchants and the transaction data, while at the same time we are neutral, right? We are not a retailer. Yeah. I do think we are in a really, really well positioned to help do this kind of consolidation in our industry going forward.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because we're starting to see programmatic sneak into retail media more and more.
Yeah.
And if we go to a world where it looks a lot more like programmatic, I've been thinking about, what do retailers do not to get totally commoditized, right? Because you remember, the publishers, some of them have still continue to do very well, but a lot of them were just suddenly I set up pre-bid and I put 10 SSPs in here and just I get a check, and that's the check I'm going to get, right?
Yeah. And I would even argue that this kind of trend is actually even accelerating with AI. Yeah, because what happens right now is, and we see that right now happening for publishers, which is more and more consumers, right? They no longer go to Google and then get linked out to a publisher. They actually stay on Google websites, right? And they get the answer on Google themselves, or they get the answer on ChatGPT or Perplexity, right? But for them, for consumers, it's no longer the need to go to a publisher to actually get the answer to the question that they have. And as a result of that, many publishers lose up to 30-40% of traffic that originally came from Google. Yeah?
Right.
And what's happening is the same is going to happen for merchants as well. Because in the very near future, consumers will actually make the purchase on Google, on ChatGPT, on Perplexity, right? And that means fewer and fewer people will go to merchants' websites.
Right.
And hence they will struggle now with reach and frequency even further. Yeah. And so the question for them is now, for the merchants, what do they do, right? And that's where, for example, our latest product innovation, what we call storefront ads, comes into play. Where we basically now taking a merchant's storefront, putting it into an ad, and run this ad on any publisher website. The cool thing about that is now that as a consumer, you can make a transaction within the ad format itself. It's very easy, very seamless. From a publisher perspective, it gives them access to now new forms of monetization, while at the same time, the consumer, as he transacts in the ad, he stays on a publisher website. They're no longer leaving the website to finish a transaction, right? So publishers have more users staying on their properties. It's easy for consumers to transact in the ad itself, all powered by PayPal and trust that comes with PayPal. And from a merchant perspective, they have now new storefronts, right? That's why it's called storefront ads, in the open web. So we're basically now moving the open web into, let's say, open commerce, And every touch point in the open web can become a storefront and can become an opportunity for a consumer to make transactions. And so I think that's really important for merchants because, again, they need to find creative ways of getting more reach and frequency into the storefronts as they're challenged by AI.
Right, because then of course you can run ads in those. You can run ads in ads. You're going to run a promoted listing in a
exactly. That's the next step.
Storefront in a 100%.
Exactly. But again, they need to do that because what's the alternative? The alternative is not doing that, and then the consumers not only do they not go to a merchant website anymore and make a transaction within the AI environment, but secondly, also what happens is they lose the relationship to the consumer. Right? Because if you make a transaction on a merchant website or in the store for an ad, you as a merchant still have the one-to-one relationship to the consumer. Right. If that transaction happens in an AI environment, the AI provider owns the relationship to the consumer. It's no longer the merchant. So the merchant's losing that kind of relationship. And that is, again, very dangerous for merchants. So yet another reason why they should leverage things like storefront ads and be creative in ways of how they can get in front of the consumers in a new world.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about when, because ChatGPT has launched kind of the shopping in ChatGPT and thinking about, okay, if you're a merchant and, now it's, ChatGPT is going and looking at your website, pulling products in, customers are buying them. How do ads fit into that? Like at some point, are we literally serving promoted listings to AI? Are we targeting it? Right? Is OpenAI trying to capture that? Right? Because I'm sure they'll think about how do they run a promoted listing campaign in the chat. But at some point, we're actually just serving ads to shopping agents.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But again, I think there are two steps, right? The first step is, as you mentioned, that it's really about that the listings that you will see in an AI environment, I'm sure will also be sponsored listings.
Right.
Yeah, which means they are kind of ranked by conversion likelihood, and then you offer merchant to pay extra to get boosted in that ranking, right? And whether you do that on a standard retail website or whether you did in an AI environment, that's basically conceptually and technically same thing, right? The next question is, what if then the consumers are no longer making the purchase decision, but the agents make the purchase decision on behalf of consumers, right? That will be an interesting new world of how sponsored listings need to evolve in this new kind of new phase. And also, I would say that in this new kind of phase, things like branding become even more important, right? Because as a consumer, you need to basically give some direction to the agent,
right?
And quite likely, you will give them some direction in the form of, hey, here's a list of 3 brands, right, that you can pick from, and then the brands need to make sure that they are kind of in this consideration set. So I do think that it's almost kind of a renaissance of brand marketing that I see in this AI world, because that will become a key differentiator and a key kind of input into the agents.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I think about how I would use this, right? It's like I have like an Anchor power bank, that I take when I travel, right? And it's like, it dies. And so when I go to ChatGPT and just say, hey, order me another Anchor power bank from Amazon.
Yeah.
Right. I've now told it a brand and a retailer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And so you're right. Like, I think either you have to become that brand to that name, or I've also thought that, a savvy way that ChatGPT or somebody could do this is almost more of an offer, right? It's something that comes back and says, hey, you said buy Anchor from Amazon, but Best Buy will actually deliver it tomorrow and it's $3 cheaper.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, sure.
Yeah.
Right. And then, so
Yeah.
you almost like, it's
Yeah.
almost like an auction, like a real-time auction at this point, because I'm declaring my intent, like back to like
Yeah.
Priceline or something like this, right?
Yeah.
I'm like declaring my intent of what I want.
Yeah.
And people could potentially bid on who wants to offer this anchor that I need by tomorrow.
Exactly. And then again, we are in a form of sponsored listings, right? Where we now
Yeah.
basically we're not only ranking the ads, but we're also basically mixing in offers into that ranking. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea is that the offer is then kind of increasing the conversion rate. Yeah. And if a retailer, you can either say, okay, I basically pay extra to get boosted in sponsored listings with an ad, or I take the money and put it into an offer, which means now the consumer gets the value, yeah, and hope that this is a smarter way to get more transactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. We're entering a fascinating time, I think.
But it's
I
also
guess it's
why,
always that case.
from a paper perspective, we have a really strong offers program, exactly to your point, right? Where we say, hey, offers is a great way for our merchants, right, to basically give the people the last nudge to actually make the purchase. And it actually does work, right? If you put an offer in front of a consumer at the right point in time, you see a much higher conversion rate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a cost to the offer. Yeah. And so you need to basically calculate the incremental ROAS of it, but actually it does work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it works on me. I think every once in a while you've been looking at some shoes or something, and then you just get that, 10% off and you go buy them.
Maybe James, you should Honey again. Remember Honey, the browser extension?
Yeah.
That's part of paper, right? That's exactly what you get, right? They look.
I know. I think I don't need that though. I don't need any more encouragement to buy things online.
In case you do, right? It would find the best offer for you in case you find, or look for the next anchor power bank. Yeah, it does work pretty well actually. Yeah.
Awesome. One other thing I wanted to touch on. I think we've talked about this some in the past is like where, and I know you talk a lot to brands and agencies. I think we've talked some about like what do retailers need to think about and what are they working on. But I think it's also so important of like, the people spending here. What do they care about? Like, and so what do you see changing kind of in how brands and agencies are approaching retail media in general? Like, what are they looking at from a measurement perspective, or which retailers are they gravitating towards and spending with?
I mean, two things that come to mind. The first one is to your point, right? Compared to 3 years ago, when I launched the other kind of business, at that time, retail media networks, commerce media networks were kind of really early days, right? And so the agencies weren't ready yet to kind of lean into, but they are now, right? Now it's really fascinating to see how much agencies are actually leaning into not only retail media in general, but also PayPal specifically. And I think the reason is, to your point, because of measurement and the transaction data that we have across all these merchants. So right now, it's at the end, it all comes down to measurement. Now, when it comes down to measurement, two things come to mind. The first one is that everyone talks about incrementality. Yeah. So the question is really, how can I prove that this investment provided incremental new users, incremental new orders, incremental increases in basket sizes, or whatever the KPI could be. However, the first question that actually the brands ask themselves, and that comes from the CFO, is how is my market share actually changing if I invest more advertising dollars? Yeah. And so the first question typically is the CFO looks into market share and the potential impact of advertising dollars into the growth of market share. That's the first order question. Once the CFO has decided how much money the CMO is going to get to spend in the marketing, the CMO then decides how to best allocate the spend across all the different options, which is when incrementality comes into play. Yeah?
Right.
As we are now sitting across all the merchants, right? Let's say you have a running shoe company and they are spending across many, many merchants. We can provide them data about market share, and how market share is changing over time and how much money makes an increase in their market share. So we can help them to answer the CFO question. Right. And then we can also help them to answer the CMO question, should they spend more money with retail number 1 or retail number 2? But again, I do think from a measurement perspective, you need to basically be able to answer both questions, the market share question at a higher level, as well as the incrementality question on a more tactical level. Right. And right now, most of the measurement is still focused on incrementality. Not so many conversations are right now anchored on the higher strategic question about market share.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people are still catching up on incrementality.
Yeah.
Right. Like a lot of it is still just showing a ROAS number and not even covering the incrementality part. But I agree with like the market share piece, right? And just to clarify, it's kind of like if you're Brooks versus OnCloud, and you're saying, what is my percentage of sales at this running world or whatever kind of retailer, right? And knowing like what somebody coming in to buy men's running shoes, how many times am I winning that transaction?
Exactly. And that's actually what investors really care about, right? They want to know if you're Brooks, actually, are you winning versus your competitors? Are you increasing your market share? That's what the CFO is asked. He's not asked the question, what is the incrementality?
Performant was your ad campaign on Running World, right?
The question is, hey, show me that you actually have over the last quarters increased your market share step by step. That's the question that the investor community would like to know, right?
Yeah, and, and I think that's another point going back to the kind of one of the unique positions that you guys have is being able to do that at a more holistic level, right? Exactly. Because like we've looked at, we're kind of building some of that at Kevel to say, how do we do that for a retailer? But that's market share for an individual retailer. That's, what is your share at this retailer, not what is your share of this market, right? Correct. Or at least digital market, right?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to measurement, the other interesting thing also is that we have almost kind of went from probabilistic measurement to deterministic measurement and now back to probabilistic measurement.
Right.
Yeah. The same with identity, right? Remember when it was not about lookalike modeling, right? And it was, no, we should all do kind of deterministic first-party cookies, right? And now we are again back into probabilistic. And it looks like as if AI has given us the permission to do probabilistic again when it comes to measurement and audience targeting.
Yeah, as long as it's powered by AI and machine learning, I think we can get away with it. Exactly, then everybody will trust it. Yeah.
Exactly. But again, to your point, measurement is really a big theme right now, big topic right now. And we have a good kind of advantage here. I mean, another thing for us, what we are spending a lot of time right now is as we have now launched the advertising business first on PayPal and also on Venmo, right? And Venmo is actually something that's really in high demand from an advertiser perspective because the Venmo audience, it's a high income audience, a social audience, right? And people who spend money, right? That's kind of the ideal audience that almost every advertiser wants to get in front of us, from them. And so we see a lot of kind of demand right now for the Venmo audiences, more than actually I had anticipated when I joined PayPal. So I'm really, really glad to see that. And then we launched Offsite. We spoke a lot about Offsite sitting across all the merchants. We spoke about the store format. Another big opportunity for us is now international rollout. As I mentioned earlier, we are in so many markets. And so we rolled out the UK. We have now rolled out the advertising business in Germany, right? And more to come. So also for brands, we are not just a US player. We're also a global player, which is especially for global brands, also quite interesting kind of value proposition, and also for agencies, right? That they can do business with us in many, many regions. So it's also exciting from that perspective.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, I think people forget sometimes that we do a lot of work in Europe, and the size of retail media is quickly growing in Europe. And it's still, in some countries like Germany and UK are pretty on par with the US in some ways from a sophistication, but then there's lots of growth in these other countries like Spain and Italy that are kind of a little bit, I'd say, behind, but catching up quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I was at a conference earlier this year in Germany, right? Everyone talks about commerce media, as we do here in the US, right? It's a thing everywhere right now. And again, it's great that we have a solution, not only in the US, but also in other markets as well. And that gives us a scale, right? From an audience perspective, but also from a technology and data perspective, that just makes it easier to grow this business relatively fast.
Yeah, and I'd say I think in Europe, this is kind of true for us as well. You guys, there's also a privacy advantage where a lot of, there's data solutions in the US that would never be allowed in the EU, but PayPal has a direct relationship with their users.
Exactly.
And it's just a different setup than somebody just trying to scrape credit card transactions like we have tons of here in the US.
Yeah. And we are a very, very trusted brand, right?
Yeah.
That is also really important here. Yeah.
That reminds me, last question I had for you was, we've talked a little bit about Offsite, and we have a lot of retailers thinking about Offsite. And I tend to see them kind of take one of two strategies, which is one is, let's just upload all our data to LiveRent Marketplace or something like that and just spread our data everywhere. or they say, we're going to own the ad sales, right? Like we're only going to make our data available through campaigns that you're purchasing with us. I don't know that there's like a right or wrong solution, but I'm curious how you think about those two options when a retailer is thinking about which approach they're going to take.
I mean, for me, there is actually a right answer, which is the second one, right? For me, I fundamentally believe if you really want to kind of monetize your audience data, you need to actually combine that with media. That's the only way of how you actually can truly get a value for data that you actually deserve. I mean, there's a reason why you cannot go to an Amazon, to a Facebook, to a TikTok, to a Google, or to a PayPal and just buy their data, right?
Right.
You can only get it in combination with running campaigns with them, and that's the same for PayPal, because I do think that's the only long-term viable way and also a consumer-friendly way of how you can actually run an advertising business. And there are also reasons why there are not so many kind of third-party data sellers out there anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So for me,
Awesome.
the answer is relatively clear.
I agree. I try not to, when we talk to retailers, that's what we always position. Obviously, you have a little bit more of an investment, right? Building up that team to sell ads and there's kind of delayed gratification. But I think when you look at like you said, when you look at the top, retailers and media companies, nobody's out there just giving their data away, even if, whatever they're getting paid for it, it's still probably giving it away compared to what they could make if they bundled it with media.
Of course, because in the moment you give it away, right, there's no need anymore for the brands to buy your first-party media.
Right.
Because you can reach now the audiences on the open web for a much cheaper price point.
Right. And then you can just also do what we all know has been happening for a long time, which is just, re-cookie those users and have your own data set.
And so in the short term, you make maybe some extra bucks with selling data, but in the long term, you're basically killing your own kind of 1P media business.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been great, Mark. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm glad we can make this happen. And thank you again. I'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, James. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to Unlocking Retail Media. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share this show with your network. We'll be back soon with more insights to help you navigate the future of retail media. See you next time.